All right.
Hi.
Good morning. We have beautiful flowers. Every time we have beautiful flowers.
Yes, every time. It's after Christmas now. Mm-hmm. We're in between Christmas and New Year, but it will already be 2026 when you see this. Time keeps moving on, regardless of what we do as mortals. When we first started this series 2 years ago, we weren't exactly sure what direction it was going to take or exactly what we wanted to accomplish. So it has kind of taken on a life of its own, and those who have been watching since the beginning will recognize that. The tone and the content is very different now from what it was 2 years ago. And that's because we've been in a learning process ourselves. First of all, learning the material. Secondly, learning how to present it. And thirdly, learning the techniques of audiovisual magic.
Recording and processing and uploading.
Over time, we have perfected all of these, or at least improved them.
Or become proficient in them.
Yes. So we hope that it's getting better and better. In a way, we would like to go back and recreate the older ones, but that's not the way life works. You can watch the growth process, and that's part of the experience for our viewers as well. I want to discuss a little bit about Zemindars. We've talked about it because it came up in the last letter or two. Those were the people that KH was hoping would contribute the vast majority of the money that Sinnett needed for his newspaper project. The Zemindars, as we learned in our last session, weren't originally landowners. They were tax collectors, and he will bring that up. They were making money off of the cultivators, the men who were renting land, sharecroppers, as we would say in the U.S., and they were abusing that. The Mahatmas were very much interested in correcting the situation because it was not due to the karma of the raiyats. That's the name of the sharecroppers, the ones who actually did the farming. It wasn't their fault. They were being taken advantage of. I wanted to point out that Damodar, who we have talked about several times, his father was a Zemindar, and a very wealthy one. Many of them had tremendous wealth. And he was expected to follow in his father's footsteps. His family members joined the society at the same time he did. But a few months later, when he decided he was going to renounce his caste, they got very upset. His father disowned him, basically. And Damodar, at the age of 22 years old, realized that that was the path he wanted. He did not care to follow in his father's footsteps. And he wrote a very beautiful article for the Theosophist where he told all of the reasons why he was denouncing his caste. And it was really well written. If you ever want to read that, it's in one of the first issues of the Theosophist within the first few months of its original publication. It's called Why I Renounced My Caste. Now, let's go ahead with our story here. We discussed a little bit about the situation in our previous video right at the end. So if you haven't watched that and it's not fresh in your mind, please go back to number 74 and watch the last 5 minutes of it to lead into this. In our previous session, where we covered letter number 112, KH said, I didn't realize how deep my poor people had sunk, meaning in their spirituality, but that his involvement in trying to get this newspaper started made him aware of just what a poor state his people, the Indians, were in. And he's kind of despairing about that. He also said, I stepped outside our normal limits for your project with the sense of its necessity and potential usefulness. And he said, if this project fails, I will go back into obscurity and we will no longer be in communications. He said, in fact, if your paper doesn't succeed, it will be due exclusively to your unfortunate letter on the 17th, published in the London Times. Sinnett had written a letter, and go back to the previous session if you haven't watched that to see what that letter was about. He also, in that letter number 112, said that he had tried very hard to help C.C. Massey because that was a project that HPB had been working on for years, trying to bring him along as a chela for the Mahatmas. And they and she worked very, very hard. But he, just like St. Moses, was clueless as far as having any degree of discernment. So despite all their efforts, he failed as a chela. At the very end of that letter, he said, we, my dear sirs, always judge men by their motives and the moral effects of their actions. For the world's false standards and prejudice, we have no respect. So with that in mind, let's go right into letter number 113. At the beginning of letter number 112, he said private, but not very confidential. You'll have to go back to that to see why he said that. So let's go ahead with number 113. Remember, Sinnett is in London. He had been there since April, and now this is in early August of 1883. This, by the way, was not received through HPB. She was at Adyar, and somehow the Mahatma transferred the information to the letter somewhere, and I don't think there's any record of where, but it was received apparently by mail by Sinnett in London in August.
Strictly confidential.
Okay. The previous one was private, but not very confidential, meaning he could share part of it at his own discretion. This one is strictly confidential. Don't share it with anybody.
The moment of reckoning has come. Ooh, setting the tone.
Yeah. Remember, he was still hopeful in the last letter. He was still quite hopeful, but after the letter that Sinnett had written to the London Times, people were starting to use that as an excuse to drop out and rescind their offers of money.
The moment of reckoning has come. The resurrection of the phoenix, lying in a death-like state, depends on your answer, whether consent or refusal.
So he's going to make a proposition.
If you believe in my word and, leaving the raiyats to our care, are prepared for a somewhat unclean work from the European point of view and consent to appear to oppose our work while serving our ends in reality, thus saving our respective countries from a great evil that hangs over both, then consent to the proposal that will be made to you from India.
All right. So he's going to ask Sinnett to go outside his bounds of English propriety and work along the same lines that they work. Because the Mahatmas try to influence events and people's opinions behind the scenes. As we've learned with how they work with HPB, they often use means that appear devious to the Europeans and to the Englishman. And so he's taking Sinnett into their confidence, and he's giving him a chance to work along with them using their own methods, which they believe are completely ethical, but Sinnett and Hume are not so sure of it.
You may work to all intents and purposes to oppose the Bengal Rent Bill, because regardless of what you or others may do, you will never be able to impede our work in the opposite direction.
Now, what is the Bengal Rent Bill? The bill was in the Parliament, and that was the bill that was supposedly going to rectify this situation between the Zemindars and the raiyats, because they were horribly taking advantage of them. So let's go ahead and continue.
Therefore, one scruple less as one non-permitted confidence more. Truly a riddle.
Yes, and I wasn't exactly sure how he meant that, so I just left it as it is, and you can try to solve the riddle yourself.
And now, good friend, I must explain, but prepare your European notions of right and wrong to receive a shock. Wow. We always talked about the masters as being 100% ethical and not lying, and this is going to be interesting to see how this
it is
presented.
And that's something that very few people understand, because they are part of the spiritual hierarchy of our planet, and they do things differently from the way we do. We always want to, even if we're good people, we want to help people escape from their karmic debts, for example.
But we know that's not always the cosmically accurate
They
thing
don't
to do.
look at it the same way.
Right.
Same with nations, same with the entire planet. All of humanity has karma, and they know what that is, and they work along those lines. Mm-hmm. To us, it would look absolutely horrendous. So, for example, at certain periods of time, a particular ethnic group or a particular race of people has lived its purpose.
Well, it's the starfish story from our book.
Yes, and it needs to start fading out so that something else will come to replace it. Well, that involves sometimes the death of people. And so, yeah, we think that's horrendous that they would be involved in that. But sometimes they are. Yeah.
Letting nature unfold without meddling is kind of what we're saying here. We've mentioned the starfish story several times. If something is happening, we want to maybe stop it because we would feel better about saving lives. But are we meddling with something that's supposed to happen a certain way? That's the question.
And as we've said before, the ultimate goal of all of the hierarchy is to become part of the theosophists. They have numerous different functions, but in essence, they are the forces of nature. Mm-hmm. They are the very forces of nature.
Yeah. One of the only constants is change, and I know that's kind of a cliche thing, but one of the outward purposes of Shiva consciousness in certain traditions is the dance of destruction. It's not a negative thing, it's just that all structures are unstable. Nothing lasts forever. There needs to be dissolution to have reemergence and evolution. Nothing lasts forever. The dissolution must occur of even our physical bodies, especially our physical bodies.
In the legal world, they used to talk about acts of nature.
Yeah, right. Insurance companies love that phrase.
Well, they actually used to call it an act of God.
Yeah.
An act of God was nature, whether it was a flood or whether it was a wildfire or any natural
tornado,
disaster.
Something like that.
That was an act of God.
They won't insure against.
It's actually an act of the theosophists because they are nature. They are the only force that could be considered a sort of universal God, but they are not personal gods at all.
And we shouldn't confuse this with someone up in the clouds deciding to send a hurricane through a nation to wipe out a culture that needs to. It's not that. They're not up there scheming and planning. It is nature itself. It is the cosmic mind itself doing what nature does itself. Evolution, devolution.
Devolution,
Yes, it's the process. Involuting, evoluting. Cycles.
And there is no hatred, no emotion at all involved. It is the cycle of life. It is what has to happen. It is nature in process. So there's no personality involved in it.
Mm-hmm. And now, good friend, I must explain, but prepare your European notions of right and wrong to receive a shock. A plan of action of a purely Asiatic character is laid out before you. And since I'm not allowed to move one finger to guide your understanding or feelings, nor would I even if I could, it may be found too Jesuitical to suit your taste.
And we're going to find out a little bit what he means by Jesuitical.
Think of Jesuits.
Yes.
That is interesting. I love the way he writes. It may be found too Jesuitical to suit your taste. Alas, that you should be so little versed in the knowledge of occult antidotes as to not be able to perceive the difference between the Jesuitical, the end justifies the means, in quotes, and the necessity of the practical application of these sublime words of our Lord and Master, quote, O ye bhikkhus and arhats, be friendly to the race of men, our brothers. Know ye all that he who sacrifices not his one life to save the life of his fellow being, and he who hesitates to give up more than life, his fair name and honor to save the fair name and honor of the many, is unworthy of the sin-destroying, immortal, transcendent nirvana.
And that's the end of the quote.
Well, it cannot be helped.
All right. So bhikkhus are the monks, the Buddhist monks, who have taken an oath. They are full-fledged monks. They have devoted their life to the words and the doctrines and teachings of the Buddha. The arhats, of course, are the Mahatmas themselves. So, as he's implying, this applies to all range of the Buddhist priesthood, I guess. It's not really a priesthood because they're not priests in the regular sense of the word, but they are the ones who have devoted their entire life basically to help humanity, to teach and to lift them up. And so what he's saying in essence is, if that is who you are, you should be devoted to mankind, to humanity. And even if it costs you personally, that is something you must be willing to do. So he's comparing, KH is the difference between the Jesuits who said, well, God wants this certain effect to occur, and whatever it takes to do that, we're entitled to help him out that way. Compare that to everything depends on the motive. If it's to help mankind, you must be willing to sacrifice your own life if that is necessary.
I wonder why he's saying the Jesuits are the ones who started that, though. Are they older?
I think they started in the 1500s, if I remember correctly, and they were a very nefarious group. We'll find out a little bit more. At the time, in the 1880s, they had tremendous power, except in England.
But didn't the concept of jihadism start way before that in
Yes.
Islam?
Oh,
but that's the same thing, but much older, I feel like.
Right.
So I wonder why he's quoting the Jesuits.
because they were the ones that were in force in Europe at the time. They had tremendous power. Because remember, the vast majority of countries in Europe were Catholic. They were Roman Catholic. And the church took great pride in the power that it wielded.
When I think of Jesuits, I get them confused with Druids. That's not the same thing, right?
Not
Druids,
at all.
Okay, not the same thing. Okay. Allow me to explain the situation to you. It is very complicated, but to the man who, without any previous training, was able to assimilate some of our doctrines so well as to write esoteric Buddhism, The inner springs that we have to use ought to be understandable.
And by springs, I assume he meant sources. So,
Like a wellspring.
right, the source.
1. The Bihar chiefs propose 1.5 lakhs down for the phoenix. And as much when they see you back in India, if the Bengal Rent Bill is opposed by the new paper, and you promise to give them your support.
All right, so these are the wealthy people among the Indians who have the money to donate, and a group of them has said that they will invest 1.5 lakhs, which is 150,000 rupees, about $2 million in 2025, and as much when they see you back in India. It's not 100% clear, but it implies that they will put down 150,000 rupees now, while Sinnett is still in England. And once he has moved back to India, they will put an equal amount. That's what I take it as.
Unless the proposition is accepted by you, we may prepare for the final cremation of our phoenix, and for good. Exclusive of this sum, 150,000 rupees,
which is about $2 million today.
We can only count on 45,000 rupees, about $600,000 in today's money, in shares so far. But let the Zemindars put down cash and all will follow.
So this would be a huge amount of the total that Sinnett needs. He calculated that he needed about 500,000 rupees. So if I'm not mistaken, this would be 345,000 of that amount.
That's a lot of money to start a newspaper.
Well, yes, it is. Today, if you wanted to start a newspaper, you probably would have to have about $7 million or more at your disposal.
Wow. Number 2, if you refuse... Well, so why would he refuse this? Why is there even a question?
Because remember, he says this is going to shock you because it goes against what you think are proper ethics.
So we haven't come to that point yet.
Right.
Okay. Number 2, if you refuse, they will get another editor.
So in other words, if you don't accept their proposition because they want something for their money, and basically it's to appear to support the Zemindars, the ones who are actually taking advantage of the riots. And that, we will find out, is the position of the Mahatmas. They really care about the riots. They want to protect them. The Zemindars, the wealthy people, can fend for themselves. They have all the power and the money.
Let me get this straight. So we're going to be taking money from the people that are taking advantage of...
Yes. Okay. That's where he is afraid that Sinnett is going to have trouble with this.
Okay. And when they say that they'll find a new editor, well, it wouldn't be just an editor. It'd be a whole new avenue for their voice to be heard.
Yes.
It wouldn't be the Phoenix at all.
Exactly. Because if you reject their offer, then they're going to give the money, put it to use somewhere else.
Even though we are approaching them and asking for money, they realize that they're going to create this appearance to the world of how they're doing the right thing. But now, if Sinnett doesn't follow through, they'll say, oh, well, we still need to get this image out, so let's give this money to a different newspaper or get a different thing happening to promote ourselves.
And remember, he said several times this is a very complicated issue.
Yes.
And we'll learn later that the Jesuits have their fingers all over this proposition.
So the Bihar chiefs are Zemindars.
Yes, or they're representing them.
Okay. And there are many other groups of wealthy people in different areas, the Raj of this, the Grand Poobah of that. And
Yes.
Okay. Number 2, if you refuse, they will get another editor. If there was any danger for the riots and the bill, the Zemindars would lose nothing thereby except the cleverness of their editor, but they have hope and are thoroughly unaware of being doomed in the long run.
So here's what he's saying. you can very safely appear to be supporting their cause because it's not going to work out no matter how much money they put into it. We'll find out why he says that.
This is just smart business. It's not unethical.
I don't think so, but yeah, I can see how some people would.
Right. The only real loser in the case of refusal will be India and your own country eventually. This is prophecy. You know, this is interesting. This is their version of the end justifies the means.
Yes.
It's their version of it. I wonder what Taimni would say about this. Taimni is like the orthodox ethical person in his explanation of satya and truth.
I think he would be very much of the opinion that the Mahatmas are.
Because appearing to do something that you're not, he would say is a form of lying.
Well, yes, but let's look at his justification because he's going to give Sinnett some reasons why you should be able to do exactly this.
Okay. Number 3. The Zemindars' resistance to the bill is infamous in its nature.
Yeah. So this bill supposedly is meant to rectify this situation, the inequity. And in truth, there are lots of little bombs built into it, which would prevent that from happening.
Those who examine things at the core perceive that the real culprit is Lord Cornwallis and his long line of successors.
And that's the one that in our last session we explained had gotten the bill passed that gave the Zemindars their tremendous power. They misunderstood the fact that they were not the landowners, but were in fact tax collectors for the Mughal Empire. And so the British enabled them to take advantage of the riots. But they didn't realize it. Now, this bill is supposed to rectify that, but there are all kinds of little schemes going on to where it doesn't actually do what it looks like it's supposed to do. We see that in politics all the time.
I mean, I was going to say, that probably wasn't anything new then, and it's still commonplace now, unfortunately.
Nothing ever changes.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. It can't be helped, for it is human nature itself, and there is no dishonor in supporting their claims from a legal standpoint on the part of an editor who knows them to be doomed than there is for a barrister to defend his client, even a criminal who will be sentenced to be hung.
So he's saying even a criminal is entitled to a defense attorney. That doesn't make him a bad person. So that's one reason there that you should be able to do this.
That's one thing that I don't think you and I have ever really talked about is a defense attorney for someone who is guilty. How do you defend?
Well, one thing you can do, and I've looked at this a lot because I could never be a defense attorney, but I've looked at how you could justify that. And as long as you are not lying, then you absolutely can. For example, you give reasons why this isn't as egregious as people might immediately judge it to be. For one thing, they give the background. You know, this person came from a very poor, disadvantaged situation, and they were abused. And mentally, they're not even capable of making rational choices sometimes.
If those things are true, you can present those.
Yes.
If they're true.
If it's true, you can present all of the information that you think might make people on the jury a little more lenient to your client.
I am now trying to argue from your European standpoint, for fear you may not be able to see things from our Asiatic point of view, or rather, in the light we, who are enabled to discern future events, see them.
So, in this case, they can see the future. And this, I believe, means that their superiors, who probably can see more clearly the future, have conveyed that to them. That's my supposition.
Number 4, a conservative editor whose field of action will be found to run parallel to that of a conservative viceroy will find he has lost nothing for a slight opposition that cannot last long.
So Sinnett, as we learned in previous episodes, is ultra-conservative. He is in favor of the aristocracy, the monarchy, the whole social system that exists in England. He's very much in favor of that. The Mahatmas in HPB, not so much.
There are great flaws in the present bill when examined from its legal dead letter aspect.
And dead letter here, I assume, means that it doesn't really have a future. It's going to end up DOA. But for now, people are at least thinking that it could succeed. But he's saying there's no way it will succeed in its present form.
Number 5. Owing to the idiotically untimely Ilbert Bill, the agitation is carrying the population of India to the verge of self-destruction.
So here's a complicating factor. There are actually two bills that were presented at approximately the same time, and it's by design. It's not a mistake.
Political games to confuse. Yeah.
So this Viceroy, the Viceroy Ripon, we're going to find out more about him, but he has asked people to present both of these bills. He's trying to destroy the Zemindars. That's why KH says they won't succeed in the end. And what he's also trying to do is to appeal to the Zemindars and to the people of India in this Ilbert Bill. So what is the Ilbert Bill? The Ilbert Bill was a legislative proposal in British India that aimed to grant senior Indian judges the jurisdiction to try European British subjects in criminal cases. They had never been allowed to do that before. They could only be tried by English judges. And so this is what he was trying to do. He was trying to say, we're going to give the Indian people more jurisdiction over their own country in criminal cases. And he knew full well that the English people would be up in arms about that. How dare you have these native people being able to judge our citizens? So he knew that, but he was trying to appeal to them at the same time. We'll find out a little more about the background, and this is a really sordid story and situation here.
Don't think that I'm exaggerating. The English, and especially the Anglo-Indians, are running the same course from the opposite direction.
Yeah, they're in cahoots, but they're pretending to be in opposition.
You are at liberty to refuse my warning, but you will prove wise if you do not. Now, to return to our primary object. Number 6. There are several Englishmen of great intellect and ability who are ready to defend and even to ally themselves with the Zemindars and oppose the bill against their own principles and feelings, simply because the Zemindars hate and oppose the man whom the rest of the Hindus profess to adore for the time being, and whom they are exalting with all the ardor of simple-minded, short-sighted natives.
Yeah, so they're
right?
trying to take advantage of the native population by appealing to them, but it's not sincere at all.
Thus, the raiyats cannot escape their fate for a few months longer, whether you accept the offer or not.
So again, he's emphasizing the raiyats are going to get their situation equalized. It's going to happen no matter what. So even if you appear to be helping out the Zemindars temporarily, it's not going to affect the outcome for the raiyats.
In the latter case, of course, the newspaper scheme is at an end.
Yeah, so if the Zemindars don't support your newspaper, then it's all going to crash down as far as our ability to create this newspaper and use it as an effective force for helping the Indian people.
Number 7. At the same time, it is better that you should be prepared to know the unavoidable results. The chances are 100 to 1 against the phoenix ever coming into existence. if the offer of the Zemindars is rejected, at least as long as the present agitation is going on. And when it finally fails, as the project is bound to unless we get control of the situation, then we will have to part. Oh.
Yeah, he said that before.
Boo.
And he's emphasizing it because it's now coming down to crunch time.
KH feels that if the Phoenix doesn't happen, there's no more need to communicate, there's no more need to push forward with this experiment. Jeez.
Yeah, and as he is going to point out, he had to get special permission to even work with Sinnett on this. And now it's being restricted even more. Basically, if it fails, he has to part company.
In order to get the Chauhan's permission to defend the millions of poor and oppressed in India, by bringing to bear all our knowledge and powers, I had to pledge that, in case of the Phoenix's failure, I would interfere no more with such worldly matters and bid farewell forever to the European element. Ah, that was the condition.
Yes.
So the Chauhan made him a deal.
Yes, he did. He said, look, you devoted a lot of time and effort to this project, but you've got other work to do. And if this doesn't work out, you need to just put an end to that and move on with other things.
You know what's really cool about that? The Chauhan is remembering his role of steward of the proper evolution of the planet. And KH is like us. We have compassion. We want to help. And sometimes it's not good to meddle in karma like that. And the Chauhan is remembering the natural course of things. This is interesting.
Well, they're still going to help the poor people, the raiyats, and all of the poor workers in India. They will continue to help that because that isn't their karma. They have been taken advantage of for centuries, first by the Mughal Empire and then by the Indian wealthy. So they will continue. Remember, they've made it clear the wealthy landowners, they can fend for themselves. The Rajas, they've got money, they've got power. We care about them, but we really care about the poor working class people who made them rich. That's how they got rich. We care about those workers. Look at politics today, and you'll see that a lot of politicians claim to care about the working class, but who do they get their money from? From the billionaires and the large corporations, and then they're indebted to them. So who are they really trying to help? Themselves.
Moria and Jual Kul would have to take my place. Oh, okay, so it's not like cut off contact altogether yet. It would be just him. Okay, Moria and Jual Kul would have to take my place.
Well, and he's talking about Europeans in general, not specifically Sinnett.
Okay. On the other hand, if you consent to the offer, your opposition to the Rent Bill would have no more effect on our work on behalf of the raiyats than a straw would to save a boat from sinking.
Yeah, it's going to happen. He's saying there is so much force behind it from the hierarchy that it cannot fail.
On the other hand, if another editor is selected, we would have no reason to exercise our influence on their behalf.
Yeah. They would have to use other means.
This is the situation. It is a curious combination which will make no sense, in your opinion. I mean, maybe it will. Why does he keep saying that?
Because he can read Sinnett's mind. He knows his attitudes. He knows his prejudices. So, yes, he knows Sinnett much better than Sinnett knows himself.
Wow. We can hardly expect you to see through it clearly at the present time, nor is it likely that you will judge it fairly, owing to this hazy darkness of cross-purpose. Nor is there any particular need that you should, if the offer has to fall to the ground. But in case your answer is favorable, I may as well add a few particulars. Know then that, opposition notwithstanding, and in fact because of it, you will bring the great national crisis to a head sooner than could otherwise be expected. Whoa. Thus, while strictly carrying out your intention and promise made to the Zemindars, You will be helping the events that have to be brought about to save the unfortunate population that has been suppressed ever since 1793, the year of Lord Cornwallis's great political mistake.
That was the original bill which created the whole discrepancy by misunderstanding what the role of the Zemindars was.
At the same time, you may be doing immense good in every other direction. Think about the past, and this will help you to see our intentions clearer. When England took over Bengal from the native rulers, there were a number of men who exercised the calling of tax collectors under their government. These men received, as you know, a percentage for collecting the rents. The system of tithe and tribute under the Muslim rulers was never understood by the East India Company, especially the rights of the raiyats to oppose an arbitrary change to the Muslim tax laws.
So the British just took over Bengal, but they wanted the money still coming in because they were going to tax it now. So they tried to copy the Mughal system, but instead they got it confused.
Well, when the Zemindars found that the British didn't really understand their role, they took advantage of it. They claimed to be landlords.
Yeah, we're not tax collectors. We actually own the land.
England agreed to recognize the claim, notwithstanding the warning of Muslims who understood the real situation and were not bribed, as most in the East India Company were. Wow.
Imagine that, bribes.
Wow. The English played into the hands of the few against the many, the result being the, quote, perpetual settlement documents.
Yeah, that was what was passed in 1793.
It is this that led to every subsequent evil in Bengal. Wow.
Yeah, set up a very evil situation where hundreds of thousands of people were taken advantage of.
Jeez. Seeing how the unfortunate riots regarded by your proud nation in the 19th century, being of far less value than a horse or a cow, in your opinion, it is not difficult to imagine how they were regarded by your countrymen a century ago. When every Englishman was a pious Christian at heart and was ordered by the Bible to draw a broad distinction between the descendants of Ham and themselves, the heirs of the chosen people.
And what is he referring to? A lot of Christians, even today, claim that God doesn't like dark people, people with dark skin, and that he put a curse, first of all, on Cain, in the story of Cain and Abel, and then secondly, on the son of Noah, who was Ham, and that his descendants were all black, whereas the other descendants were white. I have no idea how that happens, unless he was from a different wife or something. But all of the descendants of Ham were supposedly dark-skinned and were to be reviled. So the Christians felt completely entitled, they were perfectly fine with that, to treat them as black human cattle.
The agreement drawn between Lord Cornwallis and the Zemindars, which stipulated that the, quote, black human cattle should be treated kindly and justly by the Zemindars, and that they should not raise the rents of the raiyats, was a legal farce. The Chohan was in India at the time.
I don't know if that meant he was living there, but he must have been.
Wow, so he was in a body.
Whether it was a different body or the same body, we don't have a clue.
Wow. The Chohan was in India at the time, and he was an eyewitness to the beginning of horrors. No sooner had they secured the perpetual settlement agreement than the Zemindars began to disregard their responsibilities. Failing to fulfill any of these, they brought yearly ruin and starvation on the miserable raiyats. They exacted tribute and trumped up false charges against them under the name of abwab.
Abwab was the law by which they got taxes from the raiyats. There were two different types of taxes, as we will see, but that was the taxes that they extracted, the total taxes.
These gave them whatever they wanted, and for over 50 years they levied the most extraordinary taxes. The Zemindars have done all this and much more, and they will surely be made to account for it.
And now we see why Damodar was anxious to renounce his caste and to no longer be a part of this Zemindari system. It was filled with evil.
When the Sepoy Rebellion created a certain impediment by resulting in another form of government, things too horrible to mention were done under the gaze of the East India Company's employees, and often with their sanction. That's terrible. It is to correct the great wrong that was done that Lord Ripon got the idea in his head to bring forth the new bill. It wasn't thought expedient by his counselors to crush the Zemindari system without gaining popularity among the majority at the same time, hence the Ilbert Bill and some other trinkets.
Yeah. So they're trying to placate both parties, both the poor people, the raiyats, and the Zemindars, the ones who have money. So it's a game they're playing.
We say that, to all appearances, the object of the present Bengal Rent Bill is to correct the wrongs of the past. My friend, you are a remarkably clever editor and an astute, observant politician. No one, perhaps, in all of India goes as deep as you do into the inner constitution of the Anglo-Indian coup d'etat.
And he's using the French spelling that would be plural. So it's more than one coup d'etat.
It's funny, in French, you can't hear if it's plural or not.
Right.
Coups d'etat.
Yeah, they would use les coups d'etat
Oh,
or
les.
des coups d'etat.
That would indicate les
Right.
would be the plural.
Yes.
Okay. Les coups d'etat, several of them. Nevertheless, you do not go far enough, and the oldest layers of the political soil as the genesis of some acts of Lord Ripon are uncharted territory for you, and even for older hands at politics. Neither Lord Ripon nor his counselors, those operating behind the veil, anticipate any great results during his power in India. They are more occultists than you might imagine.
They're playing the long game. This is just setting up the game board, basically. And he's going to show just how devious they are because they have a very long-range, far-spread objective in mind.
Their liberal reforms are not meant for India, to whose plight they are quite indifferent.
Yeah, of course.
They're looking for results in the far distant future. The Press Acts, the Ilbert Bills, the Bengal Rent Bills, and the rest are aimed at Protestant England, which very soon, if something or somebody doesn't interfere, will find itself suffocating in the invisible coils of the Roman Catholic Apophis.
Apophis was the Egyptian god of darkness, chaos. And so he's comparing the Roman Catholic Church to this god that makes darkness and chaos and makes everything murky.
Friend and brother, the only one of your race whom I regard with a warm, sincere affection, be careful. The only one of your race whom I regard with a warm, sincere affection, be careful.
Yeah, he isn't too fond of the English people.
Wow. Do not reject my warning too lightly, for it is a solemn one, but I am only permitted to make a hint. Political skepticism, like every other type, scorns and laughs at the observations of those who do not belong to its factions. It realizes its mistakes only when it has fallen into a ditch. Beware, for it is no longer just a ditch, but an abyss that is being prepared for you. What? Oh my gosh.
So he's trying to give him as much information as he thinks he might be able to absorb, but he's not terribly
Confident that he'll accept it.
Yes. So we'll see. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. Let's see on what grounds an honest Englishman can oppose the rent bill.
Yeah. So assuming that you do accept this proposal and pretend to be helping the Zemindars, let's see what tactics you could use.
Mm-hmm. No honest government has the right to break its pledges regardless of the great misery of the riots, however just the reprisals that are in store for the Zemindars. However human and generous on its surface the object of the rent bill is, and just because some Zemindars have not fulfilled their part of the agreement, it gives no right to the government to shred the perpetual settlement agreement.
All right, so there's one point. Not every Zemindar is evil, like apparently the majority were. So we can't just destroy the agreement because there are some bad actors in the group. Because what about the ones who are being equitable?
The sins of the few can't be cast upon the many. Well, it sounds like it's the opposite way around. The sins of the many can't be cast upon the few.
Well,
I understand.
yeah.
There are heavy flaws in the present rent bill, just as there were in the old system, and there is no clause in the old documents that the settlement can be nullified at the will of the British. I won't go into the defects of the dead letter meaning in either one, but will simply tell you that there are such flaws, and that, until modified, you have a perfect right to object to them.
Yeah. And as it turned out, the bill was passed, but it was modified tremendously. So in its original form, he said there's no way that it will be passed. And he was correct.
You aren't expected to demand that the bill be withdrawn, but to simply support the Zemindars' analysis of its defects, and this you can freely promise. However, I must not seem to be trying to influence you one way or the other. Of course he is. He's proposing something.
Well, he says I must not seem to be.
Oh, okay. Some of the claims of the Zemindars are infamous, and no honest man can be made to support them, but others have a strong legal foundation in their favor. The ruling power, for instance, was never the owner of the Karaji land.
Of the Karaji land. Karaji was the system by which the taxes were collected. We'll find out more.
The ruling power, for instance, was never the owner of the Karaji land, not even under Muslim laws. Thus, you have the spirit of Karaj.
Now, Karaj is the tax on the land itself. So every year, the ones who were working the land had to pay a land tax.
And Ushur.
And that was the tax on the products of the land, to harvest, whatever they were growing.
Thus, you have the spirit of Karaj and Ushur that you can work on in order to redeem your promise to the landowners and appease them for a few months until the day of the almighty smash that is in store for them.
So, regardless of what you do and what they do, it's not going to work. So, you won't lose anything by pretending to help them.
All you are asked to do, for the benefit of your country, as well as mine, is to ignore the ugly facade of the edifice and take into consideration only the real nature of the situation and the future good results, in case you are able to get over your natural squeamishness.
Yes.
I wonder if he's going to accept or not.
We'll find out.
In a few days, you may receive a formal proposal. Think it over well. Don't allow yourself to be influenced by any consideration in connection with my desires. If you honestly believe the offer is inconsistent with your European notions of truth and honor, refuse it without any hesitation and let me bid you a sad, though ever grateful and friendly farewell.
So he repeated this several times. It's obviously serious.
It seems like there's no way he can say no to this because what?
Well,
it seems that way.
Let's continue.
I can't expect you to see things from my own standpoint. You look without, I see within. Ooh.
Yeah, he sees it very differently.
That's a mic drop moment right there, Mr. KH. This is no time for sentimentalities. The whole future of the brightest jewel in the crown of England,
which is India,
is at stake. And I am bound to devote all my powers, as far as the Chohan will permit me, to help my country at this 11th hour of her misery. Oh my gosh.
So they are devoted to helping India, the poor people of India. And the Chohan is behind it. All of the Mahatmas are behind this project.
At some point, I'd like to discuss, not right now, but if they're so interested in helping, we have been taught that karma happens and people are born into situations for a reason. How is this different than the Holocaust, for example? We don't need to talk about it now, but we're taught in theosophy that people are born into situations to experience things that they need to experience based on karma. But here we're hearing the Mahatmas saying this is not their karma. We need to help them. So I want to see how this is different than the Holocaust.
They can see the cause and effects from centuries ago, thousands of years ago. They can follow the entire history of what has led up to a situation in the current time. We don't have that ability.
If what we're assuming or what we're gleaning or synthesizing is true, that these Indian people, it is not their karma. This is a mistake. This is an evil. This is an evil mistake.
And the more we study theosophy, the doctrine, the ancient wisdom doctrine, it's the clash between good and evil. Very simple.
I know, but we've been taught that we're born into situations that seem evil because we need to experience something like this. We need to, based on karma.
But if during your lifetime somebody takes advantage of you, that may not be your karma.
It may not be.
If someone kills you, if they rob from you, that may not be your karma.
That's interesting, though.
This is a national situation. This affects hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, so did the Holocaust.
Yes, and we don't know, but there was a reason behind that.
Of course.
We don't.
Of course.
And that sometimes people who would say that might, well, how dare you? Of course. What did they do? Well, we don't know their past lives.
Yeah.
We do not know their past lives.
Okay. I can only work with those who will work with us. Don't accuse me, my friend, for you don't know the limitations I am under. Don't think I am trying to lure you into accepting that which you would refuse under other circumstances, for I am not. Having pledged my solemn word of honor to him to whom I am indebted for everything I am and know, I am simply helpless in case of your refusal and will have to part.
And I assume that's the Chohan, to whom he is indebted for everything he knows and is.
Capital H also.
Yes, he did use a capital H. He's up against the wall.
If Sinnett trusts him, he'll do it. This is so crazy. You must decide, and if this letter is destined to be my last, I beg you to remember, for your own sake, the message I sent at Shimla to you and Mr. Hume through HPB. Quote, Lord Ripon is not a free agent. The real Viceroy and ruler of India is not at Shimla, but at the Vatican.
Oh, here's the twist.
And the effective weapon used by the latter is the Viceroy's confessor.
The
What does that mean?
priest who the Viceroy confesses to is the one who has the power. Imagine that. He is the Queen's Viceroy, agent in India, and yet who is giving him commands? The Vatican, through his confessor, his priest. All right, now, before we read the last paragraph, let's talk about this a little bit. HPB seemed to be completely unaware of this letter. Sinnett did begrudgingly accept KH's offer. And he basically said, well, I don't have a choice, so I guess I will do it. And he did it very begrudgingly, but he did it. And I don't know all of the things that he proposed or that he did on behalf of the Zemindars, but HPB, obviously not knowing about this letter, was very upset. And she wrote Sinnett a long letter just unleashing on him. How could you possibly help these Zemindars when you know that the Mahatmas are trying to help the poor people? What ails you? What is wrong with you? So she was out of line, but she also was out of sync with the Mahatmas in this case. We can see a little bit, at least, and understand to some extent why Sinnett had trouble with relations with HPB. There were some legitimate reasons, but in the end, it was his lack of discernment that done him in, so to speak. I'm going to have Paul read a short excerpt from a letter that she sent him, not deriding him about his helping the Zemindars, but about the Viceroy, Lord Ripon. And this is, again, from the book, The Letters of H.P. Blavatsky to A.P. Sinnett. But it doesn't appear where it should in the list of more or less chronological letters. Instead, it's more than halfway through the book. And it is undated because the compiler wasn't sure where it should belong. But obviously, it should belong much earlier in the book. This is from letter number 56, which is labeled private and confidential. And it obviously, by the tone of the letter, was dictated to her, most likely by K.H. HPB writes very differently when it's just her own words. But when it's from K.H., she has a very different tone. So he's talking about this situation right here, and go ahead and read that excerpt.
The appointment of Earl Ripon, who was not only a Roman Catholic, but notorious as a man of mean abilities, to the Governor-Generalship of India, gave the Jesuits an excellent opportunity, and accordingly the Jesuit Father Care was always at his elbow in Government House, Calcutta, and was virtually the Viceroy of India.
Yeah, so who was really in charge?
Wow. This Jesuit father was the real author of the Ilbert Bill.
Imagine that.
Wow. Which, had it passed, would have been more disastrous for England than the Indian Mutiny, and for the Hindus worse still. Of course, as it stood, it was framed to damage English rule in India. It failed.
Yeah, so they had a long-range plan.
It failed owing to something the English know nothing about yet, but the Jesuits, who play for large stakes and are used to failures, do. And very soon they will try something else.
So they had big plans, not just for England. England was kind of the outsider because they were Protestant. They did not have fealty to the Vatican, to the Pope. They created, through King Henry VIII, their own church, which was Catholic, but not Roman Catholic. One more schism. But as far as the Catholics were concerned, that was a Protestant church. So now we know what they were trying to do. They were trying to destabilize governments and create chaos all around Europe so they would have more control. I think they were realizing that the time was coming when their control wouldn't be quite so absolute. And they realized that if they could make everything unstable, that would give them more control, because they were viewed by the populations, by the general people, as being spiritual, more stable, when in fact they were creating chaos and anarchy. That's what they were up against, and that's why they so often rail against the Jesuits. Now, the bill did pass in a different form, and it actually did some good. So let me read a little bit about what the final bill did accomplish. 2 years later, it was renamed the Bengal Tenancy Act of 1885, and it granted significant rights to the raiyats by legally recognizing their occupancy, protecting them from arbitrary rent hikes and being ejected, and allowing them to transfer their holdings, thereby offering them much-needed security against Zemindar exploitation. It formalized their status, distinguishing them from mere tenants at will, and giving them property-like interests in the land they cultivated. So they weren't just people renting land, and it was never intended that that was the way it would work. So the key rights that they got were after 12 years of continuous cultivation, a raiyat gained occupancy right, making them settled raiyats. They could not be evicted except for specific reasons such as non-payment of rent. Landlords couldn't arbitrarily increase rents. Enhancements were restricted to specific grounds. Occupancy holdings became transferable. So it was a long-term right that they had, and if they wanted to sell it or give it to someone else, they could. It gave them a valuable asset. They were entitled to compensation for improvements made to the land if they were ejected. So all the work that they did, a Zemindar couldn't just say, well, you know what, I'm going to cancel our contract, and despite all of the improvements in buildings and additions that you made, well, they couldn't do that anymore. Before, the Zemindars had almost total control to do whatever they wanted. So it did have some good results from that. Now we're going to read the last paragraph of this letter, and that's on a different topic.
Please give my best wishes to your lady and Morsel.
Morsel is Denny, the little 6-year-old son. Morsel was a term of endearment for a cute little child at that time. You're so cute, I could just eat you up.
Like a little morsel. Despite a few undetectable mistakes and omissions, your esoteric Buddhism is the only right exposition, albeit incomplete, of our occult doctrines. He's coming out of the blue and just saying this, which is a complete different topic.
Right. And he said the same thing in the previous letter. So he's reasserting that. Obviously, certain people are complaining about certain aspects of his book, and he's assuring him there's nothing major wrong with it.
You have made no fundamental mistakes, and whatever may be given to you hereafter will not clash with a single sentence in your book, but on the contrary will explain away any seeming contradiction. How greatly mistaken Mr. Hume's theory was is shown by the chela in the Theosophist.
And, of course, Hume is still stirring up trouble. So he's writing letters to the Theosophist and complaining about Sinnett's book and trying to poke holes in it.
Hume doesn't know the occult doctrine. That's crazy. With all that, you may feel sure that neither Moria nor I have contradicted each other in our respective statements. He was speaking of the inner round, and I of the outer round.
And this seems to be about the 7 rounds. Moria said something early on that seemingly was contradicted by K.H. later. But he's saying that they were looking at it from 2 different viewpoints. Inner round, meaning the higher self, Atma Buddhi Manas, as opposed to the lower self, the personality. And if you look at it from 2 very different viewpoints, it's going to appear to contradict. And he says that's the only reason it does not contradict.
There are many things that you have not learned, but may someday, nor will you ever be able to comprehend the process of the obscurations until you have mastered the mathematical progress of the inner and the outer rounds and learned more about the specific difference between the 7 rounds.
Yeah, he's lacking a lot of information, and it can't be transferred at this point. Some of the information has been purposely obscured to prevent him and others from deducing the truth about certain aspects, because it would give evil actors a lot of ammunition.
Yeah.
And so they have to be careful about how much gets out into the world.
So according to Mr. Massey's philosophical conclusion, we have no God? He is right, since he applies the name to an extra-cosmic anomaly. That's funny, an anomaly. And we, knowing nothing of the latter, find that each man has his God within himself in his own personal and at the same time impersonal Avalokiteshvara.
Yeah, so I guess C.C. Massey was trying to put them down by saying they have no personal God. And he said, you're right, we don't have a personal God. Your own personal God is within you.
I kind of like how he says it's an extra cosmic anomaly, because that's how he's explained it before, not in those words, but it would be an anomaly.
Right.
It wouldn't be in the natural flow of how things work to have some entity outside of it all puppeteering it all.
And he said many times, how can you have nature that is all God? God is all nature, and yet he created himself. How does that even work?
And now, farewell. If it is that we should correspond no more, remember me with the same sincere good feelings with which you will always be remembered.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
KH. He doesn't sign it quite as affectionately right now as he used to.
Yeah.
These are rough times. And it's affecting HPB, it's affecting Alcott, it's affecting all theosophists, including Sinnett. It's going to get even rougher, but they have numerous enemies who are out to destroy them. And many of them are actual members of the Theosophical Society. Hume, as we have learned, has turned quite a few of them against HPB and the Mahatmas. They never give up. They never quit trying. And we'll find out that he's actually still sending letters at times to Hume. They still try to keep him in the fold, if possible. Yes.
Really?
He has told Sinnett to avoid him because he says he will draw you in and it won't work out well. He said, you're best off just to stay away and only interact with him if absolutely necessary.
I wonder if Hume kept any of those letters somewhere.
We will never know.
Yeah.
But Sinnett being in England and Hume being in Shimla creates a tremendous difference, which helps Sinnett stay away from him. But they can obviously still send letters. And Hume does. He uses his letter writing ability to try to bring things down to where he can manipulate
I
it.
wonder if anybody had tried to track down Hume's descendants and find out if there is a box of letters somewhere. That'd be kind of interesting.
You want to take on that task?
Not really.
No, me either. Me either. I suspect that he destroyed them at some point, and maybe he never even kept them. He probably did keep them because he probably would keep them as ammunition. And when he realized they wouldn't actually serve him any longer, I'm guessing that he got rid of them. So even though this is not directly involved with chelasship, still it is involved with chelasship. He's asking Sinnett to go outside his norm and support a project that he would think was improper. And he did it very reluctantly. And HPB unloaded on him. So we'll find out more about this in session number 76. But the one thing we get by studying all of this is a much clearer understanding of how the hierarchy, how the Mahatmas in their role as part of the spiritual hierarchy operate in the world. They're not like the Mahachohans, impersonal. They're very personal. But at the same time, they have to stay out of the spotlight. They have to stay behind the scenes to protect themselves and to protect their doctrines and their powers. So they have no other choice. They've tried periodically coming out partly into the public eye, and each time it has not worked well. This experiment has not worked well at all, except that today, 140 years later, we have access to this information. For us, that's extremely helpful But at the time, it was extremely stressful to those who were involved, HPB and Alcott, and all of the workers who were completely devoted to getting this doctrine out to the world.
It did work, in a sense. It got so much information to the Western world.
It's always a mixed bag of results, and it's going to be that way always. You never get everything that you're hoping to, and yet you do have results from your efforts. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Just don't expect them immediately. It may take a long, long time for those results to appear. So we can learn so much from watching all of this situation. As it turns out, a lot of what I thought we could skip over completely or just skim over is actually more important than I realized. I never understood large portions of the Mahatma letters. I understand it far better now than ever before. And hopefully this will aid other people in their study of the Mahatma letters. All right, enough for today. Thank you so much. We appreciate our viewers. You are the reason that we put forth all of the effort, which is a lot. But we do it for ourselves as well, and we do it for humanity. So thank you for your part in this project, and we will see you in session number 76.